Welcome to the Heartbeat with Larry and Laura, where we have our fingers on the pulse of today's most relevant spiritual and humanitarian topics. Today's episode is Spiritual Responsibility in a Changing World. Where do we start? Life is changing at a rapid pace. The changes in our world, while thrilling to some, are very scary to others, especially in the world of politics. Democracy, while never perfect in its expression, has been the stronghold for the voice of the people in many countries. In recent years, the institutions that support democracy and the well-being of the people around the world have been questioned, criticized, and even attacked, to the point where trust in government of the people, by the people, and for the people is on the wane. In fact, Gallup polls have shown that satisfaction with the state of democracy in the U.S. has dropped from 61% in 1984 to 28% in 2024. And it appears to be declining even as we speak. And when democracy struggles, so do the things it supports, like stewardship of the environment, alliances between nations, quality education, and the freedom, prosperity, and well-being and equality of individuals and groups. In the face of all that, the Gallup polls have also indicated that at least 70% of Americans think of themselves as spiritual or consider spirituality to be important to them, whether or not they have a particular religious affiliation. And spirituality is a broad term encompassing many areas of belief beyond physical or circumstantial appearance. Our guest today can tell us about some of these areas, the perspectives they can provide on what is happening in our world, and how we can learn from our own evolving spirituality to move through the challenges to a better and brighter future. My partner, Laura, will introduce our special guest.
Well, Christopher Naughton, the first thing I want to say about you is that you and your beloved Valerie have been friends of ours for a long time. You are both wonderful, loving, generous people. We have had the privilege of enjoying your hospitality, of working with you, and of just getting to know you in some very special ways. And that said, I'm going to add a few things that I got from your website. And the first is, I thought this was rather fascinating. Since I share a birthday with Queen Elizabeth II, I noticed you share a birthday with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, the thing about Franklin Delano Roosevelt is that he was an exceptional moral and visionary leader who led this country through a time of crises, great crises. And that's one of the things you greatly admire about him. So how cool to share a birthday. Now the day, not the year. With
I'd be
him.
dead.
Yes.
Likely.
Yes. And just a little bit about you. You have a deep appreciation for the ideals that founded this nation, for its roots of consciousness. And you have spent much of your life exploring this country's history and its constitutional DNA and innate spirituality. And that pretty much speaks to how everything has shown up in your life and your work. You are a former New Jersey prosecutor, civil litigation attorney, and the 6-time Emmy award-winning host and producer of the American Law Journal, which was accepted by American Public Television for distribution on PBS stations. I had the privilege of working with you for a while on your program, New World Radio, and I still love that name, New World Radio, and what it stood for: a holistic worldview focusing on consciousness and comparative spirituality. And it aired on NPR affiliates, AM and FM, and commercial stations, as well as Unity Online Radio. You are now a guest host for New Thinking Aloud, conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery. And I love those conversations. I've tuned into a couple of them, and they have expanded my own awareness of the infinite universe we live in and the infinite potential that we have as human beings. And you are a trained and certified holistic life coach, helping lawyers and other professionals achieve extraordinary success while maintaining a work-life balance. And I want to tell you, I think sometimes we spend our whole lives looking for that work-life balance. And I would be willing to be coached on that anytime myself. Your first book, which I'm thrilled about, which you talked about as our first guest more than 2 years ago because it was about to be published. Your first book, America's Next Great Awakening, The Convergence of Mysticism, Religion, Atheism, and Science. Wow, it just brings all of those fields together so beautifully as you unfold the development of our American democracy from its principal roots through the development of religion and spirituality in the United States, and even including atheism and science as perspectives, as world perspectives, as global perspectives, in addition to religion and spirituality and politics. So you are well versed in all of these areas and are the perfect guide. I have read a lot of that book, and I love how it deepens my own thinking regarding those areas and speaks to my heart about what is true about us as a country and as a world. So I'm excited, and I know Larry is, to have you here today.
Man.
And I'm going to open with a question based on a question you asked of the readers in your book. And that question is, and if we have to edit this a little bit, because I'm looking for that question right now, that'll be okay. Okay, that question is, okay, I'm going to say this, Larry, you can do the editing here.
No problem.
Okay, Christopher, you asked, at this time in the country's evolution, where some historians place it on par with the 3 or 4 greatest crises to ever face the Republic, will America pursue its better angels, as it has done before, shepherding the nation and indeed the world through existential crises? And that better angels was a term used by Abraham Lincoln in a time of crises, calling forth the better instinct and values of humanity. So tell us more what you think is the answer to that question, Chris.
Well, first off, it's so great to be with you guys again. Again, we do have a deep connection that goes far back, and New World Radio was our production, Laura, and I still think it was the greatest program not picked up by NPR. But anyway, another story for another time.
Hey, I agree, man.
Now, some of that stuff, I mean, how do you pat yourself on the back? But I went back and I hadn't listened to it in a while, and I still recommend if you really want to hear some good stuff. New World Radio, I think, is still available on Apple, but Apple iTunes. But, the question you ask is, will we find our better angels? And let me just go, I'm going to go to 2 different sources here to tell you where I think we are in American history, what chapter we're in. One is a dyed-in-the-wool historical look, and the other one's a little more metaphysical. So I got one for you, Larry, and one for you, Laura. So we'll look at it from 2 different perspectives. Now, about 28 years ago, 2 historians, Neil Howe and William Strauss, wrote a book called America's Fourth Turning, The Fourth Turning. And what they had done is they had written a book called Generations. And what they had looked at was how generations seem to have similar characteristics over a period of time. And they go through a period of recycling and a period of moving back and forth into time, and they rhyme with one another. And what they had done after writing 2 or 3 books about specific American generations, the fourth turning talked about that America goes through an existential crisis every period of an average life, between 80 and 90 years. And they looked at America from its starting point. And they looked at the American Revolution. And 80 to 90 years later, we went through the American Civil War. And 80 to 90 years later, we went through World War II. And 80 to 90 years later, here we are. And again, I can't go into it, but I really endorse, if you are into history and into cycles of history, look at the fourth turning. Neil Howe, his partner William Strauss, is now dead, but he has reiterated this prophecy, if you will, historical prophecy, with his latest book, The Fourth Turning Is Here. And in 1997, the words that he and William Strauss came up with is, by about the year 2025, America will go through a crisis where democracy itself will be in peril. And, you say, well, sometimes you can throw a ball against a barn and it's going to hit every now and then. But the fact of the matter that they had laid out why they felt that way is just, in my mind, fairly incredible. And what the fourth turning is, it takes a look at those 80-year or so period of an average human lifetime and cuts that into 20 years within that 80-year cycle. And there's a first turning, a second turning, a third turning, and the fourth turning. The last 20 years of that 80-year cycle seem to be the most perilous. And if we go back to the American Revolution, we obviously know that America went through a great challenge. In fact, that's where its birth was. And then 80 years later, we had the American Civil War, where literally the future of the country was at stake. We didn't even know if we would remain a country. In 1941, about 80 years after the beginning of the Civil War, America engaged in the Second World War, and truly democracy was at stake around the world, not just in America, but at stake. And it was FDR and it was American democracy that saved the world from totalitarianism. And we find ourselves in that kind of place today, where I would say that this rhymes very much with the 1930s, with fascism and totalitarianism and the strongman on the rise. And not just, some would argue, in this nation, but around the world. Now, I'm going to jump a little bit here to something a little bit more esoteric and a little bit more woo, but hang in there because I think it makes some sense. Recently, I interviewed a guy by the name of Nick Dagan-Best, who to me is a very level-headed, professional astrologer. And what he and I talked about was that America goes through these cycles in almost the exact same measurement that Neil Howe and William Strauss talked about. When America was birthed, the planet Uranus, which is the planet of rebellion, the planet of shocks and surprises, the planet of technology, the planet of overturning the status quo, was in the planet Gemini. And this was also its position between 1858 and 1865, which is the time of the Lincoln-Douglas debates till the end of the Civil War. So all throughout the Civil War, Uranus is in Gemini. And then 80 years later, at the time of 1941, when we enter the war, Uranus is in Gemini, and Uranus is going into Gemini next April of 2025. So you can argue with either of those cycles, but I have to tell you, these are deeply rich, historically driven, and yes, metaphysically driven, but from people who have the ballast and have the character and have the mental acuity behind them to back up those prophecies or those predictions, if you will. And again, I would say, if you're interested, go read The Fourth Turning, go read Nick Dagan-Best, astrologer. We find ourselves in that kind of position today, where we think that democracy is unraveling, that there is little or no chance, not only here, but maybe around the world, that strongmen, totalitarians, autocrats are moving to the fore. And I can only tell you this, and then I'll pass the mic back to you guys. The one thing about these turnings or these existential crises or these astrological configurations is every time America goes into these periods of crisis, lasting about 8 years or so, it comes out the other side as a new nation, as a newly birthed nation. So the American Revolution, again, Uranus and Gemini, if I look at just the astrology for a moment, that starts at 1773 and doesn't end until 1781, which is when the settlement or the surrender at Yorktown takes place. But America now comes out as a newly birthed nation. And at the time of the Civil War, when Uranus was in Gemini, we used to call ourselves these United States. Mm-hmm. After the Civil War, after the victory of the Union, of Lincoln of the Union, we started calling ourselves the United States. We didn't see ourselves as a loose configuration. At the time of the Second World War, we were indeed the arsenal of democracy. So I foresee America going through radical changes. I foresee challenges on the horizon. I'm not going to soft soap this. Political, polarization, cultural, scientific. There's a lot at stake here. But I can tell you this. I truly do believe in the American ideal, and where a lot of people feel like this is the end of the world or the end of American democracy. And let me just tell you something. A lot of people believe, like Elon Musk and others believe, that if Trump had lost the election, it would have been the end of Western civilization and American democracy. That whatever your viewpoint is here, I can only say this. If these trends do continue, if we are reinventing ourselves, I believe America will come through this. The astrologers say it ends around 2033. That's when Gemini leaves Uranus again. But I do believe that we will come through it. And let me just throw one other astrological configuration at you too. The planet Pluto, which is the planet of rebirth and transformation, is in the exact same place it was at the time of the American Revolution. It makes one turn around the sun every 248 years. That's where we are right now. So, will our better angels come to the fore here? I think eventually, I think they will. But for America to go through a testing in these next 4, 5, 8 years, I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah, a great testing. I know Larry has spoken of some of the patterns that he sees in what's been unfolding in our country and other countries compared to the 1930s, prior to the Second World War. And Larry, you're just about on that cycle. I mean, you were born right after the Second World War. You were the first of the baby boomer generation. And do you
you're
have
right,
any
Laura.
insights or questions for Christopher there?
Well, so a couple things about that. You kind of reflected on it more than probably I ever would, except this world that we're living in is different than what I expected. Yeah, I was born in 1946, and I remember growing up. My dad had a business. His business, by the way, not just emotional or political, but economic. My dad made a lot of money in the building. His business was depended upon the growth of the community around his business. And you know about Levittown. Well, in Kansas City, you had something like that growing up here on the south side.
Mm-hmm.
He made a lot of money, so I grew up in the world. This is the way it is. You grow up, you have a business, you got all this going on. By the 70s, by maybe 70, 71, that growth was over. I mean, economists will tell you everything started to shift. And I can remember as a kid, because it's about when I got married the first time. And I remember in the news, they were talking about how bad the economy was and where it was going. It was going the wrong way. And from that point on, you saw the middle class shrink, their pay get less relative to, I have a pejorative way to talk, the fat cats. And so I think that's what's culminated in what we have. Additionally, one other thing. If you look at an analogy from the 30s, one of the major tools was the radio. And the radio was analogous to what we have with media today. That's what that was, and the Nazis were really good at making use of that in a powerful way, to the point where eventually they outlawed radios, and you could only buy a Nazi radio, 2 channels. And of course, you know who was speaking on that, you know. So that's when I look at what's going on today. And by the way, a lot of damage was done before the world came out of that. I mean, 50 million people at least were murdered. And
Yep.
So that's, I mean, I know that, you know, humanity's probably still going to be around, but how many people are going to suffer as we go through it? So that's
And
my story.
here we are in our perspective, having lived really relatively comfortable lives because of what came out of that era. Okay. And now the planets have cycled around again. Thank you for that, input about that. You know, it is amazing, because I do believe we are connected with our universe, and it responds, and we respond with it. We have a dynamic going there. But here we are in this very, very critical time. And so what I'm wondering is, what is our accountability? What is ours to do and be? Is it just to survive these times? Is it to, um, you know, hang on and even support each other in hanging on, or is there anything that is ours to do to promote the values that really have enhanced our own lives, for all human beings, or just what is ours to do? Christopher, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, and I'll address that in a minute, but let me just address something that Larry said, which is
Yes.
interesting.
Yes.
You and I, so I'm a boomer too. I was born in the latter part of the boomer generation, but all of us who grew up as baby boomers, okay, that's what we grew up with. America was number one in the world. We were the arsenal of democracy. We did not get conflagrated like England and Germany and Japan. And so we were not only importing, we were also exporting. We were the kings of the world in any way. So we grew up, and that was natural to us. And JFK came along, and he was a great leader. And before him, Dwight Eisenhower. This is what we grew up with. This is all we knew. And as young people, you think, well, it's going to be that way forever, which just shows you our ignorance of history. Because if you believe, the Neil Howes of the world, or even the Nick Dagan Best that I referenced earlier, that 80 to 90 year period, at some point in time, every person is going to understand what it's like to go through an existential crisis. Now, some people go through it in the first 20 years, the first turning, or the second turning, or the third turning. The three of us are going in the fourth turning. We are experiencing that existential crisis. Will democracy survive in the last 20 or so years of that 80-year cycle? Somebody once said, I don't know if it was Franklin or whomever, but someone once said, when the last person dies who remembers the last great war, the next great war is assured, which is a sad statement about humanity, because you would think by looking at movies and documentaries of the past that we would learn something. But apparently, this just seems to be part of evolution, whatever that existential crisis looks like, that all of us go through that at some point in our lives. Now, I would submit that we come here as souls. Not everyone believes that, but we have come here to be here at this time. And whether you believe that or not, we're here, we're present, and there's something for us to do, whether you believe that there are other lifetimes or you're an eternal being or not. Again, you could be a dyed-in-the-wool atheist and just say, well, I'm here now. Whether my soul can figure that or not, I'm here. What is mine to do? And I think we'll talk about this within this conversation that we're all having. but it is to be present. And I would just say this, I really do think this is a time of revolution. Now, revolutions can be bloody. Thomas Jefferson once said that the American tree of liberty needs to be watered by the blood of scoundrels and patriots every 20 years or so. I wonder what Thomas Jefferson would have said if he had been exposed to the likes of Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King, or believed in a real Jesus, or a Ralph Waldo Emerson and a Henry David Thoreau. Because those people that I just mentioned all believed in revolution. John Lennon, all believed in revolution, but they believed in peaceful revolution. Because the only way you're going to grow up that helix, the only way we're truly going to evolve is if there's another form of revolution that doesn't take an eye for an eye, that doesn't get on the same low common denominator as your adversary. And that is what we are being called to do. And whatever that looks like, there is revolution. People are going to need to speak up. This is a time period where no one gets to sit on the sideline. You know, people like to hide. It's like, well, I don't really want to get involved in politics or, this cultural stuff. I don't even vote, whatever people may say. The fact of the matter is that this time, I believe, is calling each and every one of us forward to be counted. No more hiding, no more sitting on the sidelines. One must be involved. But if one's going to be involved, we have to learn at least something from within our own lifetime. Those people who protested in the 60s were every bit as angry as the people who were counter-protesting or were pro-war. What is it? Mother Teresa said, if you want to bring me to a pro-peace rally, I'm coming. You're bringing me to an anti-war rally, I'm not interested. So we have decided, I would submit, to live here, to be present in this time period. What is ours to do? It is to evolve. It is to be present. It is to take the teachings of the Jesuses, Gandhis, Martin Luther Kings, Henry David Thoreaus, all the great nonviolent revolutionaries, and follow their lead. And to trust in that, because I think, guys, we're going to look back in 5 or 6 years to even this conversation and say, holy hell, I didn't think this could happen. I didn't think this would happen. I'm not just talking about the baleful, horrific things. I'm not. I'm talking about we may not even recognize who we were 5 or 6 years hence from this time period.
Wow.
Yeah.
Larry.
Exact, Christopher. I mean, you're channeling me, I think, so to speak, in a way.
Okay.
As you were speaking, I'm thinking about the turnings, etc. I'm thinking about 2 events that I never understood when I was a kid in high school, history class, which I loved. I didn't understand why they were talking about this event called the Great Awakening, and then the Second Great Awakening. As I reflect on it, now I've not studied them well, but I know the reason that they had it in the history book because it was a big deal at the time. Those are revolutions. I think revolutions first and foremost in consciousness. Yeah, and that's where revolution first occurs, is in consciousness.
Yeah,
and because it's got to occur there first before you've got enough courage to put a uniform on and grab a gun and go kill people and put your life at risk for it.
Mm-hmm.
And living through these current wars we've had, and so I don't know where we're going.
Yeah.
It's up for grabs. I think we're at a really risky time, Christopher, and it could be as dangerous and as horrific as Germany and Eastern Europe in the 30s. It could be that bad.
It could be, and look, and it could be, but I think I love Edgar Cayce, of course, the great the sleeping prophet. Would often come up with predictions in his altered state. Okay, he correctly predicted World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, but he always said this: the reason that these prophecies come through, especially the negative ones, is so that you can change it. So the great collective can change that, and I'll go to my deathbed believing that the answer is still in our hands. I'm never going to give way to any prophecy that says, oh, this is a done deal. You guys are goners. Okay. Because otherwise, why be here? Okay. It's just like, you can give me the horrific reason or reading. You can give me the horrific prediction. You can give me the horrific astrological prediction. It doesn't mean A, I'm going to accept it. But I would say this: if we always expect things to be nicey all the time, looking at our own lives, I mean, people pass on, people get sick. I mean, do we really expect to come into this physical body and think we're not going to have challenges and we're not going to deal with pain? But the old adage is, I can choose to suffer or not, even with the pain. So if a woman gives birth, and I haven't had that happen in my life, but I understand it can be a pretty painful experience, but it gives way to something amazing. So you're absolutely right, Larry. I'll say the word I said earlier. I'm not here to soft soap it. I'm not here to say it's all going to be roses and everything's going to be easy. I think when you have a clash of mysticism, atheism, religion, and science, these convergences, it creates a lot of ripples. It creates a lot of waves. It can be very chaotic. It can be very conflicting.
This concludes part one of Spiritual Responsibility in a Changing World. Where do we start? It's a real cliffhanger. You can tune in part two starting January 25th. This has been The Heartbeat with Larry and Laura, brought to you by Laura Bennett and Unity of the Heart Mind Inc. Check us out at www.laurabennett.com for a schedule of upcoming videos and activities, as well as other opportunities to connect with Laura and the work that we do. Thank you to our special guest, Christopher Naughton, to my co-host, and to all of you for joining us. We hope this helps.